Welcome back to another episode of Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble.
And I am Chris Clements.
And we have a great guest today.
We have an amazing guest today, and I have to confess something to you, Sean. I'm a little nervous.
You're nervous?
I mean, because
wow.
as you know, like Bud Light has been in the news quite a bit lately.
It
right?
has.
It has.
Is that right?
Like a lot. For one specific reason. But before we get to that reason, our guest today is Tony Ponturo, who, when he was with Anheuser Busch, was one of the most revered people in the beer industry, and as a young man who was starting out in the industry back in 1995, and then I got to be on the wholesaler panel like in 2002, 2003, whatever it was. I mean, there are two guys that the young guys coming into the business really looked to for what was really happening in the company. And one was a guy by the name of Bob Lackey, who came up with all the great commercials back in the day. Mm-hmm. The other one was Tony Ponturo, who was head of sports marketing and doing all the big sports properties.
Big sports stuff, which is what everybody understands. I mean, most people who
And those guys really built that company up to what it was. So, Tony, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Chris and Sean. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's amazing that you're here, and thanks so much for coming on. So have you heard any good Bud Light jokes lately?
Every time I see anyone, they have a comment, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'll bet they do.
But I keep reminding them that that wasn't a company that I worked for, but I certainly have my opinions. But yeah, everyone likes to take a little shot, so no one's bashful.
Yeah. I'm sure no one's bashful. Well, and I think that kind of speaks, I think, to what you were able to build over the years that you were there. Because you left the company when the InBev came and bought it, right? So that was what, 2008?
Correct.
So,
and I went. Well, now I'm leading the witness here, but I came at the end of 1982. And as I tell a lot of people, you have to remember back then, Anheuser Busch had about 22 market share, 3 brands, Budweiser, Michelob, and Busch. Busch was not even a national brand. It was a regional brand. And August Busch III, who became the CEO in the late 70s, started to say, okay, we're going to use marketing, a lot of sports marketing in order to grow the business and sort of win the beer war. Quick reference, Philip Morris owned Miller Beer at the time, so they were using the Marlboro cigarette money to fuel their marketing. So they were a formidable foe, and we sort of went from there and built a structure that, thanks to our wholesaler system, as Chris knows, took it to 50 market share, just short of on a national basis by the end of 2008, and had 50 plus brands. So it was a great time to be there. Not quite at the beginning of like the 1850s, but certainly the modern day, beer marketing. So it was a fun place to be.
I remember specifically being in sales meetings when there was this countdown happening to turn out the light, meaning LITE, that Bud Light was gaining on Miller Lite so viciously and so rapidly that we had like daily countdowns on terms of the number of when Bud Light would become that brand. And Tony's absolutely right. We grew from a 25 share to a 50 share in 2008, was the leader in the marketplace. They sell the InBev. You know what share they are now?
Well, what are they now?
Like maybe the mid 30s.
Wow.
I think the last stat I saw was like 33.
So they're down almost 20.
Well, and then what you have, because of the actions of some really misguided marketing people, which Tony, you called out so rightly on a LinkedIn post about a month ago, saying, okay, I need to speak up. The current Bud Light VP marketing says she needed to do things with the brand because, number one, the brand was declining, and number two, it's not fratty or relevant. When InBev bought AB in 2008 by InBev 3G Capital, it was flying, represented 40% of AB volume. Bud Light was the number one brand in the U.S. All the InBev people thought they were the smartest people in the room and didn't want to hear from the people who took Bud Light from intro to number one. So Bud Light VP, look in the mirror. Your fellow executives did not understand the soul of the beer consumer and still do not. That started a firestorm within LinkedIn, but it's so
No, it
true.
sounds true, yeah.
And it was so refreshing, Tony, that you said it, that you wrote it, because it was what everybody was thinking. And then it just started this firestorm of former executives and wholesalers saying this is a trajectory that we can't continue on.
Well, and just think how far off she was when she did the podcast that said it was fratty and irrelevant. So let's say 70%, maybe a little bit more of their beer volume was someone 35 plus. So that grew up with the brand, baby boomers like me, the generations afterwards. And now you just told them in a podcast that the brand that they drink is fratty and irrelevant. So that was her first mistake, which she hasn't really been called out on.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And then to try to talk to really that first 10 or 15 or 20%. And, the entry level beer drinker is important, but you can grow 15% of your volume by 20%. But if you're losing 20% of your volume to the other 70 or 80, meaning the 35 plus, because you're not talking to them, correctly anymore, that's going to be a zero sum game. It's going to be a negative sum game. And that's where they just got, and they started doing that from the beginning. They lost track of how to sort of be universal in their message, as I know Chris knows, and probably a lot of the listeners as well. I mean, the things of, I love you, man, and yes, I am, and all the things that were universally, sayings that became part of the culture.
Right.
And we first started where it was, people, unless you're really close to the beer industry, don't realize Miller Lite, LITE, had a 6-year head start on Bud Light and the light beer category. And so we had to do things to wake up the consumer. So when they went to the bar and said, I want light, the assumption was they wanted an LITE. So some of the first creative was, give me a light. And then all of a sudden, like a flaming arrow would come and hit the side of the bar and say, oh, I mean a Bud Light. But then that was the start of switching people over and then, taking, a brand that started in an introduction to ultimately the number one beer brand in the country and surpassing, Budweiser. So, but you can't forget, sort of the consumer who brought you to the dance and you're living off of with their loyalty. So when you start sort of degrading them indirectly, but in a way directly, then, that's sort of the stuff that they were just not sensitive to as marketers.
Well, it's a fascinating case study of losing touch of your consumers, right? I mean, she clearly had this, view that, this is the Bud Light of yesteryear is toxic. We don't need it. This isn't who we are. So we're going to change it. And without any recognition, as you point out, that the majority of their drinkers are definitely not in that mindset of, whatever it is that whatever worldview she's bringing to the table. And it's you have to wonder, I mean, did she look at any market research? What was going through her mind? I mean, I don't know how you go into that position and think, I'm just going to lead this off the cliff because I think I know better than all the consumers who are drinking my product.
Well, I mean, Tony, you could probably speak to this better than anybody, but from a wholesaling perspective, most of these brands, Bud Light, which we were a test market for, Michelob Ultra, also a test market for, we were really successful because you go and you listen to the customers, what they think about the brand and what the brand means to them, and you build upon that at the street level. And so most of these brands are built in, back alley bars and blue collar establishments and not at your local country club or your local
Right.
rave club in New York City. They're built with blue collar, typically, white Hispanic males. That's just how they're built.
Yeah.
The fratty piece, that's a nice piece, but it's not the piece. And quite frankly, that comment alone, in my perspective, all the years I had in the industry, was really ignorant, because the fraternity beer really is Keystone, Natural Light,
right.
Busch Light. I went to a couple of fraternity parties this year with my daughter at TCU, and I didn't see much Bud Light. It was all those three brands. So it's just part of, I think, the issue with her also, and this is endemic, I think, with Anheuser Busch, the new Anheuser Busch since 2008. It's not that new anymore, but the hiring of the Yale, Harvard, Stanford or Ivy League executive that is not paying their dues out in the trade and understanding really what these brands are, the sweat equity that has been put into the brands. And Tony, you with that post, you did an excellent job of sort of pointing that out.
Well, and I'm not here to really promote it, but I wrote a book called Revenge of the C+ Student.
We want to get to that, for sure.
Okay, yeah, but it hits right on it, because what frustrated me, and as I have taught students at NYU and advise students at Columbia in New York, is that you can have all these fancy degrees, and that's fine. But now you go into a work environment and everyone has, degrees, but what's going to make the difference? So take her, she was Harvard and Wharton Business School, right? So she had all the credentials anyone would want. But if you're not an observer of human action, if and your own human attributes that you bring to the job, and sort of rolling up your sleeves, I'll give you an example. I won't mention the name, but there was a new Budweiser brand manager when I was there. And I always kid that I survived 18 Budweiser brand managers over the 26 years, because everyone wanted to come in and sometimes reinvent the wheel. We weren't perfect either. And this particular brand manager wanted to kill the NHRA with Teddy Bernstein, which is, a unique sort of, sport event and consumer. And we said, well, have you ever been to an NHRA event? And he said, no. And I said, well, one was coming to St. Louis, come with us. And by the time, the afternoon was over, he went, I get it, right? So these people are making decisions. It'd be like me, like with the Brazilian leadership, thinking they understood the American U.S. market without getting input from the people that grew the business all that time was really an arrogant position. And it'd be like me going to Brazil and saying, no, I get the Brazilian market. I get the Brazilian consumer. I don't really need your help, Mr. Brazilian executive. You can now leave the company. So it's such an arrogant position on their part. And I hate to say it, and because, but other than you, Chris, private equity people tend to just look at cutting costs, but they don't know how to grow the numerator side of the business, which is sales, and revenue. So after 3 or 4 years, you slaughtered the pig, you've taken all the fat off of it, you're down to bone, so you've cut all the costs. But now if you haven't been able to grow your sales side, now you end up, as you said, declining in your market share, declining in your revenue, and starting to become a shell of the company that they started with in the beginning.
Yeah, and that's a great segue to your fascinating new book, Revenge of the C+ Student. You hit it right on the head, that the practical world knowledge of a lot of these executives, and you saw it on the Brazilian side, obviously great financiers, great global M&A practitioners, but not a marketing bone in their body, and they've kind of tripped over themselves for 15 years trying to figure out the U.S. market. They didn't understand the brands. Number one, they thought that the brands just sold themselves, and number two, I think most dramatically in terms of what my experience was, they didn't understand the wholesaler system either, and the contributions wholesalers make in terms of blood, sweat, and equity to the growth of those brands. They just thought they can just throw money at stuff, and it just happens.
Yeah, no, the wholesaler system, I talk about, again, being one step lower to the consumer or closer to the consumer. I remember, one of the wholesaler panel meetings you referenced earlier, and I was presenting to the group at the time. And for those who don't know, that's about 20 to 25 wholesalers representing, all the wholesalers from around the country, and it rotates, and you're getting input from the people that are, the closest to the consumer. And it was when UFC first started, and Dana White and at the time the Furtado brothers had bought it for $2 million, and they wanted a legitimate sponsor. And so we went out to Vegas and we were looking at it for Bud Light. And as I'm starting to give this presentation, someone stopped me and said, "Tony, are you asking if the wholesalers thinks the UFC makes sense?" And I went, "Well, in a way." And they went, "Not only does it make sense, but if you need a budget, you can cancel the Olympics." That's how much.
I might have been at that meeting. I somehow remember something like that.
But because as you're in the market, you're observing the consumer. I mean, I stress to young people who are all caught up in analytics, and that's fine. But I said human observation is data, and so you got to put that. I said I can walk into a concourse of a stadium or a restaurant or a bar or anywhere and start to see very quickly how it's being run. What's its process, what's its quality control, because you're just observing. So don't dismiss sort of the human observation part of business. It may be the most important thing you can bring to the table.
Oh yeah, and the beer industry, and especially in the the grunt level of the wholesaler side, really teaches you that. You have to be a observer of human nature, observer of human tendencies, and when you. This was the other thing about those comments and about this entire ordeal with Bud Light and its course of action that's frustrating is that when it takes a lot of time and effort to switch somebody to a new brand, like switching people back then from a Coors Light or a Miller Lite to a Bud Light, that took a lot of time and effort. And the marketing helped, but ultimately, if you're in a retail environment, you have to sell all the attributes of that brand to get somebody to switch. It doesn't take it. I think Bob Lackey had a great quote in New York Post last week. I mean, they took 25, 30 years of effort and destroyed it in one day. And that's how long it takes. And will those consumers come back? It's going to take a lot. They had a meeting with their wholesalers the other day. All the rags reported, and they're going to throw a bunch of more money at it, but it's going to take a lot more time.
Well, I remember I've told people this story. Around 1989, Budweiser was sitting at about 49 million barrels of beer. And as I remember, a barrel of beer is 14 and a half cases, just to put it in perspective. And the brand manager, we always had marketing meetings in the fall to August Busch the third and others, was talking about the celebration when Budweiser hit 50 million barrels the next year. Budweiser never hit 50 million barrels. And today, I think it's about 11 or 12.
Yeah.
Now, they lost their mojo because of Bud Light, but it shows you that there's no guarantee. So now that Bud Light has lost, 25% of either their sales or their revenue, it will be very difficult. I don't think they'll ever get back to sort of ground zero, if you will. They may be able to halt the bleeding, but there's never been a beer brand that I'm aware of that has lost sales over a couple of years of time and has turned it around. Once that momentum shifts, you can't turn it around, because beyond that, the consumer has lost interest in it for whatever reason. There's so many other choices now, and so, and for the wholesaler, speaking to the choir here, it's share of mind, right? So it's like, okay, used to have 4 brands, now I have 50 brands. Where do you want me to focus my attention? And when you go into bars and retail establishments, it's like, okay, I can only give you so many taps or end-all displays. What do you want me to use? And the other brands can, they may be in the building, but they're going to suffer in the sense of focus and sort of the spotlight on them at that particular establishment. So in this cluttered environment, it's even more difficult, especially when you stub your toes as they did.
Yeah, and the declines over the last 4 weeks have just been dramatic. I mean, 17%, 21%, 26%, 26%. It's hard. It's hard to build back up from that, and it's affecting their entire portfolio. I mean, Budweiser, Michelob Ultra, everything, and it goes back to everything we just said, just an awareness of what your brands represent and who you are in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, it's just being consumer aware.
Yeah.
So, Tony, talk to us about your book, because that, in my mind, is one of the very interesting aspects that you have been involved in lately. Obviously, your history with Anheuser Busch is fascinating, but you taken your experience now and used it to educate us.
Yeah, I originally wanted to publish it the old-fashioned way, and I think publishers didn't really get, they either wanted tales of the Bush family or things at Anheuser Busch, and that's not what I wanted to do. So I self-published it on Amazon, and it's 10 chapters of themes of business. My big thing is we're all a brand. So people start to understand who we are as a brand based on how we present ourselves every day and what kind of brand do you want to be, and like any brand that you buy as a consumer, it's authentic, you trust it, it's got reliability, it has value. And so we as people are the same thing. And, and then, the key factors of taking initiative and building real partnerships. And so I go through these 10 chapters with my own life, and it's not all AB. It could be a midget football game that I learned a lesson when I was 12 years old. And so, and it's as someone said, well, there's a few grammatical errors, and I said, well, you remember a C+ student did write this book, but his friends have told me it's how you talk. And so it's like I'm on the other, people who know me, it's like I'm on the other side of the table. And a friend of mine had his students read it as part of a class at UNC Chapel Hill. And so I went and lectured. There was about 100 students and some faculty. And what I took away with, and I don't, it's always tough when you're talking about yourself, but what these students appreciated is that, okay, you don't have to be it's a tough world out there now, right? And through everything, it looks like to be successful in business, you have to be mean and ogre, a little, devious, think of all the negative words. And my whole thing is, no, you can be a nice person. You can be honest. You can be truthful. You can show empathy. And you ultimately want people to, I used to have big television networks and sports leagues, we sit down for a dinner or a meeting to start negotiating. And they said, this is almost confusing because it's like you're selling us and you're the ones with the money. We should be selling you. But it was sort of our style to say, we want to make you feel comfortable and disarm you a little bit because it's a true partnership. And so we weren't the 800-pound gorilla, even though we could have been in certain situations. So I learned later that the students at graduation kept talking about this because it gave them hope, that you can, be true to yourself, be yourself, right? We're all individuals. So I learned this from my father, who was a labor negotiator. Ultimately, he headed up all RCA HR before GE bought RCA back in the day. And he was like, you can negotiate 1,000 different ways, bring your own personality and style to it. So I stress that. So in summary, you can do all the classroom work. There's a lot of students getting masters in sports marketing. You've got a lot of people getting MBAs, but no one's really teaching or emphasizing sort of the human behavior side of business. So my little 140-page book was an attempt to at least get that voice out. And so at least I got that off my chest and got to sort of speak my mind.
Well, it's such a book. It's quick read, and it has so much practical, just common sense experience in it.
Yeah.
I'm reading a quote from an article that was written about it here recently that the goal is not to have a winner and loser. The goal is to have two winners that collaborate, listen, communicate, compromise on both sides, win. That's how you approached every relationship. That's how Anheuser Busch operated, both on the retail trade and negotiating some of the largest, sports marketing sponsorships the world has ever seen.
Well, it's interesting. I'll tell you a quick story. Probably 10 years after I left, someone who had replaced me, or maybe the second or third person that had replaced me, said, "We don't understand." He had reached out and said, "We don't understand why our NBA official beer deal is so cheap." And of course, no one in the building knew why it was. And I said, "Well, because, it was a very unique deal." And so at the time, the numbers are close, they may not be exact. The NBA wanted $15 million to be the official beer. And, it was a big increase. And so I said, okay, this is crazy. In the meantime, we were spending $40 million with the NBA across all their teams and the broadcast. So my proposal, which ultimately had to go to the commissioner. So I'm in David Stern, who was actually one of the great business executives you'll ever want to meet, because he was a real person, the smartest person in the room, but a real person. I said, "David, does anyone spend $40 million with the NBA?" He goes, "No." And I said, "Well, in a way, haven't we already earned being the official beer with everything else we've done?" And he was like, "Okay, Ponturo, where are you going with this?" I said, "Well, here's what we'll do. We'll renew all those teams for 3 years at, CPI. Can't tell the teams, if we get it cheaper, we get it cheaper. And we'll renew the broadcast with Turner and ESPN for the 15 and 20 million. And so we'll continue to spend 40, maybe it came out to $45 million the next 3 years. And for that, I want you to give us the official beer for $500,000. And he said, "Okay, let me get this straight." He went up to the board and he wrote everything out I just said. He goes, "Throw in $500,000 for NBA TV and we have a deal." And so what I'm so proud of that was taking the initiative to leverage what you already were doing. He was smart enough to realize, okay, why am I squeezing the lemon that I've already taken a lot of money from? And so let me respect that. So that was the kind of business person he was. So he's getting 45 million a year for his league, maybe not his office on Fifth Avenue, but for his league and his owners. And so everybody was happy. So there's sort of two morals in that, take initiative, be creative, don't be shy to bring something forward, and then build these partnerships where you can get into the commissioner of a league or whoever it may be and have those kind of conversations. And you may not win them all, but you'll probably win more than you think you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just a
Great
approach
advice.
about just being honest and collaborative and leveraging your strengths.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
mean, just like
what you guys, that team that was there, did better than any other team I've ever been able to witness.
Yeah.
And
Tony, how did you get into this? I mean, I mean, you've had a remarkable career. How did you end up there?
well, I had a degree in economics from Villanova, and when I started doing interviews with like bankers and stuff, I literally said to myself, "These aren't my people." It's just like I'm not connecting. I love sports. I love entertainment. How can I use what I thought I had a business acumen in the sports and entertainment? And there wasn't the roadmap back in 1974. So I ended up through, you know, maneuvering, knocking on doors, becoming a page at NBC at 30 Rock. It was the first Saturday Night Lives. It was sort of a glorified internship, but it sort of made me think I was in a space. And ex-page was at BBDO Advertising and said, "Does any one of those pages not want to be an actor or a director or a producer?" And they said, "Well, I think Tony would like to, somehow get into the advertising marketing space." I interviewed, I got the job, and and I always tell people that it's not meant to sound cocky, but it's how you present yourself. I never look for a job after that. So 3 years later, I get a call from one of the television networks. Hey, McCann Erickson agency is looking for like a number one on the buying side for Coca-Cola. And I interviewed and I got the job. And then 3 years later, Darcy, which was an agency for Anheuser Busch, was looking for a number two in the New York office, again, to help their national broadcast. So before we took the business in-house, and I interviewed and I got the job. And Chris may remember the name Chuck Fruit, who was my predecessor and then went on to Coca-Cola, ironically, to head up all their global sports and media. And then I was on the job for 6 months, and Chuck and Mike Rorty, who was a head of marketing, said, we'd like to hire you to be director of media for Anheuser Busch and start helping us build this program. And I think, I was only 30, but I was, sort of a New York kid. I understood the television networks. I cut my teeth, and they wanted someone that, was coming from another part of the country, wasn't all Midwest, and understood, in those days, national TV was 50% of what we did on media. And so that got me into the company. And I debated it for a while. It's like, wait a minute, I love New York, things are going well. I'd never been to St. Louis. Why would I want to go there and work for this, this beer company? But I understood, that sports was going to be their platform. I was going to learn how a major company was run. And, and I took the job, and, 26 years later, I was still there. And the great thing about our company is that, and I didn't realize this till afterwards, no one was under a contract, an employment contract. You sort of came every day, and August Busch was a fair CEO, but a tough CEO. I mean, he would call, you get a call at 7:00 from security saying, August wants you to call. And he would say, why am I seeing this? Or why aren't I seeing that? It was very hands-on. And so, you had to earn it. And we would get our review with him. So I'm probably 20 years into the company at this point. He goes, Ponturo, I know you think you can go back to New York and make more money, but I think you're happy here. And I said, August, and you always have to say these things respectfully, particularly with him. And I said, I have a reasonable salary and an attractive bonus, and our stock's doing well with stock options. But most importantly, you empower me and you trust me. Now, if any of those things start to waver, then maybe we'll have a different conversation. But I realized, it was as much on the company, if you had someone that was contributing properly, to make them happy and want to stay, as it was for me to make them want me to stay. So it was sort of an interesting thing. He was a very, very interesting man, but took things down to the simplest core, and there was just no, phoniness, or it was just direct mano a mano, and you had to learn how to speak up respectfully, but I never once, I can't remember the issue, but he said, Ponturo, don't become a shrinking violet on me now. Keep putting your chest out and keep, because what he needed to feel comfortable with is you're spending ultimately $700 million a year, and you're dealing with, owners of teams, commissioners of leagues, CEOs, and vice president of sales and broadcasters. He didn't want his leadership in that area to be pushed around. So he needed to feel comfortable that you could hold your ground and negotiate with the best of them. But for me, in the style, that was my style, not with a billy club.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah, August was
Very cool.
August was a very strong leader, and I remember being just a lad and asking my dad about he had a unique relationship with August Busch III, and I asked him, so what is that relationship like? And Tony kind of touched on it, and what he told me, and what I remembered when I first started working with Tony on the wholesaler panel is, August is going to ask you a question, and most likely he already knows the answer. So answer him truthfully and don't beat around the bush. Tell him what you think. Because if you do, you're going to get torpedoed. And I saw more people get torpedoed for not doing that in those meetings and in wholesaler meetings and everything else. He was just he knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And it was a unique environment. It's an environment that I'm really happy I was a part of.
Yeah, it was all about trust. And
Yeah.
he would say, if you lie and I catch you lying, just keep walking.
Oh.
If you don't know the answer, just
Yeah.
say, I don't know
I
the
don't
answer.
know. I will get it for you.
I'll get it for you. And you had to, he expected you, as he said once, I don't work in days, hours, or, I work in minutes. And so you knew you had to respond. It's sort of in the book, but one of the fun sort of asides was he got to know people either quail hunting or duck hunting. And so my first quail hunt, and the quail hunt is on horseback. So you not only have to, understand how to at least not fall off a horse, but also, shoot your 20 gauge, properly. So, but he would get, go get the CEO of NBC, go get the head of sports. You come, he would have a board member. We had a board member who was both on GE's board, who owned NBC at the time, and on the Anheuser Busch board. And that's where he would just batter you with questions, not like our guests, but he would also ask them about, his employees. And I remember Bob Wright, who was the CEO of NBC, at dinner that night after 3 hours of the hunt, said, I have a whole new respect for you. He said, August did not stop asking me questions for 3 hours on that hunt. And I'm exhausted. And you got to deal with it every day.
Every day.
And I said, but he knew how to, he wasn't a behind the desk guy.
No.
He had an office, but I'm not sure he used it much.
No, you mentioned the phone calls. I got a couple of those, but also you would get a phone call from his assistant saying, August is going to be landing at such and such, tomorrow at such and time. He expects you to pick him up at the airport. And you're like, oh, okay. You got to go home and say, I got to go to, I remember one time it was Payson. I got to go to Payson tomorrow. So those were fun times.
Tony, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been a fascinating conversation. It's fun to do. We highly recommend your book. So go on Amazon and get it, either paperback or Kindle, are your options. But.
And Tony, from just a quick personal perspective, like if somebody wanted to break into sports marketing and it was their passion, what sort of advice would you give them?
I always tell, particularly students or young people, you want to get in the space somehow. Sometimes young people, and I probably did the same thing, but, they sometimes think a job, well, I had a nephew who had a job with a minor league team. He loved baseball. They wanted him in the ticket office. That's how you start, right? But he thought it was below him. In the second year, he didn't continue. And today he could have been working for, the LA Dodgers or the Diamondbacks or whatever. So you can't, you have to be a little humble, get into the business, and then just start working hard. And it's not, always that easy to get into the business, but just, be persistent, be patient. And then, the good people, they will shine. The young, we all have been around young people, whether you've interviewed someone or for a job or whatever. And I always tell people, I can tell in 3 minutes whether I would really want to hire you or not, just how you conduct yourself.
Right.
So the key is there's no job too low. Get in there, start meeting people, work hard, and but do your best to be in the space. Because as big as the sports industry is, it is a small community, and people know, and they talk and they ask, "Hey, someone out there who could, are there any young people? We've got some internships." So be humble, work hard, and don't be afraid for some of those little entry level jobs, because in 2 years you'll parlay them into something a lot better, and you'll never look back.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well,
Good.
thank you, Tony. Where can people find you?
I guess the easiest way is it's sort of simple, and I get it's just at tonyponturo@gmail.com. That's I'm not afraid of emails. I delete enough emails that I don't ask for
Sure.
from stores and everything else. But yeah, I think that's the easiest way, and I'm not adverse to you can only do so much, but I talked to a student yesterday when I guest lectured at NYU, and he just wanted, that's the one thing, people, if you can get to someone, respect their time, try to do what you want to do in 10 or 15 minutes. If it goes 30 minutes, then that's because it's going well and they like you and they like the conversation. But respect their time and let them take it further. And so, because most people want to help, as reasonably as they can. But anyway, tonyponturo@gmail.com is the easiest way.
Great.
Great.
Awesome.
Well,
Thank
Tony,
you
thanks
so
so
much.
much for coming on. Thanks.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thanks also for your mentorship of that 25, 30-year-old kid who thought he knew it all back in the day and endured those panel meetings and figured out real quickly I did not know it all.
Right.
But I got to learn from the greatest. But it was an amazing experience that's carried me to this day.
Yep.
Learning from guys like Tony and others. So
Great.
thank you very much. God bless you.
Yeah.
All right.
Buy the book.
And
Revenge of a C+
Revenge of the C+ student.
Thanks, guys.
All right. God
take
bless.
care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. See you, everybody.